He was forced to fight the bull for money. But what the animal did broke the ring. The gates slammed shut behind him. Joaquin Reyes stood alone in the center of the dirt ring, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, fingers clenched tight around the frayed rope coiled at his side. Rain drizzled through the open roof of the arena, mixing with the dust into a thin paste that clung to his worn jeans. The cheers from the crowd echoed like distant thunder, hollow and mocking. His heart pounded like hooves against hard ground, steady but growing louder. This was it. No more practice, no more pretending. He was inside the ring, and bravado was coming. He'd barely stepped into the light before the scent hit him. Sweat, hay, blood, and fear. All of it soaked into the old wooden planks lining the arena. Somewhere to his left, beyond the side gate, a heavy-bodied beast huffed steam into the chill air. The metal latch on the chute rattled. Joaquin swallowed hard. He didn't blink. Across the fence, Esteban Carnero leaned over the railing, speaking in a low, urgent voice to a tall man in a denim vest. The man nodded once, slipped something out of his coat and checked it. Quick, precise. Joaquin narrowed his eyes. A dart? It looked like a tranquilizer, sharp and glinting. He couldn't be sure, but the image seared itself into his brain like a brand. A rough voice crackled through the speaker above the gate. Rider, Joaquin Reyes, Bull, Bravado. The crowd erupted. People shouted his name like it was something grand. A few waved signs. One man yelled, "Don't blink, kid," followed by a roar of laughter. Joaquin didn't react. He couldn't afford to. Not with Bravado in the chute. Not with Carnero watching like a hawk. He stepped toward the metal gate where the bull waited behind thick wooden slats. The old rope in his hand trembled. The bull snorted. It didn't sound angry. It sounded deliberate, like a challenge. Joaquin's stomach twisted. The night before, he'd seen the animal for the first time up close. Bravado wasn't like the other bulls. Where others pawed and snarled and tossed their heads in mindless rage, Bravado stood eerily still in his pen, his enormous frame dark with muscle but oddly calm. His eyes didn't flinch when Joaquin approached. They watched, studied. That was when Mateo had stepped out of the shadows. "You think you know what he is?" the old handler said, voice rough like tree bark. "You don't." Joaquin had looked at him, trying not to show the fear creeping into his chest. "I've ridden before." Mateo snorted. "Not like this. Bravado isn't just some bull boy. He don't charge for fun. He chooses. Sometimes he doesn't move at all. Sometimes—" Mateo glanced at the scar running from his temple to his chin. "Sometimes he makes a point." Joaquin had tried to laugh it off, but he couldn't shake the image. And now, as the latch on the gate clicked once, then again, he remembered Mateo's final words. "That bull's different. He chooses who he hurts." The gate burst open. For a split second, Joaquin saw only muscle and horns. Bravado stepped forward, not with wild violence, but with a slow, heavy grace. His hooves hit the ground like thunderclaps. He didn't charge. He didn't rear. He simply turned his massive head and stared at Joaquin. Confused, Joaquin held his ground. This wasn't right. Bulls were supposed to go wild the second the gate opened. That's how it was always done. Instead, Bravado took 2 more slow steps and stopped just 10 feet away. Steam rose from his nostrils. Rain slid down his flank in muddy rivulets. And then Joaquin heard it. "Make it bleed!" Carnero's voice ripped through the arena, louder than the crowd, louder than the storm. Suddenly, from both ends of the ring, 3 handlers rushed in. They carried long black shock prods, electricity crackling at the ends. Joaquin took a step back. "Wait, what are you doing?" The handlers didn't answer. They ran past him, toward the bull. Bravado's head lowered. The first prod jabbed into his side. The reaction was immediate. Bravado roared, twisting in place with terrifying force. He kicked the prodder square in the chest, sending him flying backward into the gate with a sickening thud. Another darted behind him, trying to jab him near the flank. Bravado spun again, but not toward Joaquin. He wasn't interested in the rider. He was focused on the men with the weapons. Joaquin stumbled toward the fence. "Stop it! He's not attacking!" But the handlers kept coming. The third man charged from behind. Bravado caught the movement and surged forward. His horn caught the man's leg and lifted him clean off the ground before tossing him into the side rail like a rag doll. The crowd, unsure if it was staged, clapped nervously, then fell into stunned silence as one of the handlers didn't get up. Joaquin froze in the middle of the ring, breathing hard. Rain poured now, soaking everything. His vest clung to his skin. He looked around, panicked, unsure what to do. He wasn't supposed to be in the middle of this. He wasn't part of the plan. But Bravado had drawn a line, and Joaquin was on his side of it. 2 more handlers climbed into the ring from the far side, eyes wide, shock prods raised. Bravado let out a low rumble and moved to stand directly between them and Joaquin. Joaquin blinked. He was being protected. The handlers hesitated. One of them raised a prod toward Joaquin instead. Bravado charged. The man screamed and flung the prod. It clattered uselessly to the mud as he scrambled up the fence and fled. The other man backed away slowly, then turned and ran. In the stands, people had stopped cheering. Some were recording. Others were shouting to stop the match. One man yelled, "Call the vet!" Another, "Get Carnero off the mic!" Carnero's voice crackled over the loudspeaker again. "Stay in the ring, Reyes! Earn your money!" Joaquin looked up, dripping wet, arms shaking. "This isn't a match," he muttered to himself. "It's a setup." Across the ring, Bravado stood motionless, soaked, and still. His eyes met Joaquin's again. They weren't wild. They were heavy, old. In that moment, Joaquin understood. This bull wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for choice. Joaquin backed toward the fence. He didn't run. He didn't dare. He wasn't sure if stepping out would end it or make things worse. The gate behind him creaked open again. He turned in time to see another bull being prodded forward, smaller, younger, blindfolded and bleeding. Its legs were shaking. Another fight? Number A distraction. A punishment. Joaquin lunged toward the edge of the ring. "No! Don't send in another! He's not fighting!" But the young bull stumbled forward and tripped. The crowd gasped. Bravado turned toward it. For a moment it looked like he might charge, but instead he moved beside the calf-like bull, planted his feet, and faced the handlers like a wall of muscle and thunder. The prod men froze. Joaquin stared. Something inside him broke open. He wasn't just here to ride anymore. He was here to stop it. And that's when everything began to unravel. Bravado charged, not at Joaquin, but past him. Joaquin turned in time to see the bull crash headfirst into a wrangler mid-stride, lifting the man clean off his feet and flinging him over the iron rail. The shock prod flew from the man's hand, landing harmlessly in the mud. Gasps rippled through the stands. All the cheers and laughter from earlier had evaporated, replaced now by something sharp and uneasy. Silence. Joaquin, chest heaving, stumbled backward. He didn't understand what was happening, only that Bravado was no longer a wild animal inside a ring. He was making decisions. Calculated, focused, terrifying decisions. And every one of them pointed away from Joaquin. Another handler charged from the side with a raised prod aimed at Joaquin's back. He didn't see it in time, but Bravado did. With a burst of speed that seemed impossible for his size, the bull lunged forward and slammed the man with his shoulder, launching him clear over the fence and into the metal steps. The crowd cried out. Some rose to their feet. Others started recording with trembling hands. Cameras zoomed. Phones lit up. Eyes widened. Joaquin stared at the bull, frozen in place. Bravado snorted and turned to face him, his breath steaming in the cool rain, his flanks rising and falling like bellows. Joaquin took a single step forward, unsure, his lips parted to speak. But before he could form a word, a sharp metallic clang rang out from the far end of the ring. The side gate had opened again. A new bull stumbled into the arena, smaller, leaner, his coat matted with blood. A thick blindfold still clung to his face, soaked and slipping, and his body shivered with each unsteady step. His legs buckled, but he forced himself forward. "What are they doing?" Joaquin whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. From the announcer's booth, Carnero's voice rang out, cold and flat. "New challenger. Round 2. It wasn't a rodeo anymore. It was a war zone. The new bull, confused and terrified, suddenly let out a startled bleat and charged blindly toward the noise in front of him. Joaquin threw himself to the side just in time to avoid being trampled. The young bull slammed into Bravado. The ring exploded into chaos. Horns locked, mud sprayed. Bravado grunted, holding his ground. The younger bull pushed harder, snorting in panic, clearly unaware of what or who he was fighting. Joaquin rolled to his knees beside a fence post, mud caking his arms, heart rattling in his ribs. He saw everything through flashes, the blur of hooves, the crash of horns, handlers screaming from outside the ring. Bravado didn't attack to win. He defended, blocked, deflected. His movements weren't aggressive. They were measured. He fought like he was protecting something. He was protecting Joaquin. The realization struck Joaquin like lightning. This wasn't just survival. This was choice, purpose. Joaquin pulled himself upright using the fence, every muscle in his body aching. His eyes darted to the stands. Some people were yelling to stop the fight. Others were frozen in disbelief. A teenager beside the ring cupped his hands and shouted, "End the match!" An older man near the announcer's box shook his head, muttering, "This ain't right." Joaquin's gaze climbed toward the press box, where Carnero stood like a statue, his headset on, lips tight. Then, into a mic barely shielded from the rain, Carnero gave a command. "Dart him!" Mid-fight. Drop him before the cameras catch more. Joaquin's blood turned cold. On the far end of the arena, two men in all-black gear raised tranquilizer guns behind the fence, tracking Bravado's movements. Joaquin's body moved before his brain could catch up. He ran, slipping and scrambling across the ring toward them. A dart lifted into the air, aimed, ready. No! He vaulted the low gate, slipped in the mud, and crashed shoulder first into the first shooter, knocking him sideways. The dart fired wide, embedding harmlessly into a support beam. The second man raised his arm, startled, and Joaquin tackled him too, yanking the radio from his belt and rolling away. The crowd erupted. Joaquin climbed to his feet, holding the radio high. His voice boomed over the arena's loudspeakers. "If you hurt that bull, I swear I'll make the truth go public." Carnero froze. From his perch, he peered down at the boy covered in mud, fire in his eyes, his voice echoing across the stands. Then Carnero smirked and leaned into the mic again. "You think anyone here cares, boy? This crowd paid to watch a show." But the smirk faltered. All around the arena, phones were pointed at Joaquin, at Bravado, at the fight. People weren't cheering anymore. They were filming, posting, streaming. Carnero's face paled. Down in the ring, Bravado had locked horns once more with the younger bull, who was now bleeding heavily from a scrape above his eye. Joaquin dropped the radio and sprinted back into the arena. He waved his arms, calling out, "Stop! He doesn't want to fight! He's trying to protect!" The younger bull, blinded and stumbling, turned sharply, about to charge Joaquin. But Bravado moved in between again, shielding him, absorbing the hit. Bravado staggered. Blood dripped from a fresh wound on his flank. His chest rose and fell heavily. The younger bull paused, shaking, then stumbled away, exhausted. Joaquin approached slowly, his breath shallow, hands raised. Bravado turned his head toward him, eyes still sharp, still watching. The crowd was dead silent now. You could hear the rain hitting the tin roof. You could hear the distant sound of sirens. Someone must have called the police. But none of it mattered to Joaquin. He stepped closer, just 3 feet from Bravado now. "I'm here," he whispered. "You don't have to fight anymore." The bull looked at him for a long time, then turned, faced the crowd, and dropped to his knees. Gasps rose from the bleachers. The announcer didn't say a word. Even Carnero stepped back from his mic. Joaquin didn't move. His heart hammered as he stared at the massive creature kneeling in the mud, bloodied, bruised, but calm. It wasn't submission. It was something else, something deeper, something ancient. Joaquin heard a soft voice behind him. "Mateo." The old handler had come to the edge of the ring, his hands gripping the railing. "He's not bowing," Mateo murmured. "He's standing with you." Joaquin knelt too, lowering himself into the wet earth, ignoring the cold. Across the arena, a boy and a bull knelt side by side in the dirt. Phones kept recording. The world had been watching a fight. Now it was watching a moment of truth. And Bravado? Still standing, bruised but unyielding, horns bloodied from protecting someone he should have hated. Then, in the middle of the ring, Bravado stopped fighting. He turned, locked eyes with Joaquin, and dropped to his knees. The audience gasped. Something ancient shifted in the air. Not submission, solidarity. The ring went silent. Joaquin didn't hear the crowd anymore, not even the thunder of Bravado's hooves. All he could hear was the thudding of his heart, loud and uneven in his ears. His fingers trembled around the rope, still damp with sweat and blood, and for a split second, he didn't know if he was supposed to run or kneel or just collapse. But Bravado didn't charge. The massive bull, eyes wild but clear, body heaving with breath, stood over the other bull like a guardian. The opponent, stunned from the impact, slowly stumbled to his feet and limped away toward the far gate, dazed and confused, unsure what had just happened. Joaquin lowered the rope and stepped forward, each movement slow and careful, as if approaching a sleeping storm. He reached Bravado's side, no longer thinking about the cameras or the men with whistles or the hundreds of faces in the stands. He only saw the bull, the same one he had trained with in secret, the same one who had shown restraint when others demanded violence. Bravado nudged Joaquin's arm with his scarred snout, rough and solid, almost like a brother's silent nod. And then, with the kind of strength that didn't come from muscle but something deeper, Bravado lifted his head and looked toward the exit gate. They moved together. It wasn't planned. It wasn't choreographed. But every step Joaquin took, Bravado followed, like two souls walking away from a battlefield neither of them had ever chosen. And then the crowd erupted, not in mockery, not in screams of disapproval, but in thunderous, rising cheers. They didn't understand everything they'd just seen, but they knew enough. A boy and a bull had just defied the script. Something had shifted, something deep and irreversible. Up in the announcer's box, Carnero's voice cracked over the loudspeaker. "This isn't a circus act," he barked, his tone sharp and furious. "Get that boy back in line." But no one was listening. Not the security guards, not the handlers, not the crowd. All eyes were on Joaquin and Bravado, standing at the center of the ring like symbols of something purer than blood and money. Then, from the side gate, a voice cut through the noise, soft but clear. "Stop!" Joaquin turned. So did several others near the outer edge of the ring. It was Mateo, the elderly handler with the white beard and permanent limp. His shirt was untucked, his cap gone, and in his hand he held a folder, torn at the edges, stained with dust and age. His fingers shook as he lifted it high. "I have something to say," he shouted. The stadium quieted again. Even Bravado stood still, his ears twitching slightly. Mateo stepped through the gate, breathless. His voice cracked, but he spoke loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "This bull, Bravado, was never meant to be here." Joaquin felt a sudden weight in his chest. Mateo opened the folder, pulling out a scorched, folded sheet of paper. "He was bred for therapy programs, for veterans, for children with trauma. A rare breed, not aggressive, gentle, even after provoked. His original stable was destroyed in a fire 2 years ago. The animals were scattered, lost in paperwork. Bravado was one of them." Murmurs spread through the audience like sparks jumping from a fire. Mateo's voice grew stronger. "He was labeled as unfit, damaged, but someone changed his papers, filed him as a fighter. That man," he pointed at Carnero, whose face had gone pale, "bought him for next to nothing, lied to get him in the ring." A wave of gasps rippled through the stands. Joaquin looked back at Bravado, whose side rose and fell with long, deep breaths. The bull didn't understand the words, but somehow, it felt like he knew what was happening. Carnero, red-faced, grabbed the microphone again. "That's a lie! He's making this up! That boy staged the whole thing!" But as he turned to wave in security, another sound cut through. The sound of boots. From the west tunnel, 2 uniformed men stepped into view. Local police. One of them held a tablet, showing a paused video feed. The other walked straight toward Carnero. "Mr. Carnero," the officer said calmly, "you're being detained for questioning regarding fraudulent animal registration and endangerment." "What? That's ridiculous!" Carnero shouted, backing away. "This is all some emotional stunt." "Videos were submitted," the officer said, nodding toward the stands. "Live, during the fight. Some of them include your conversation with the handlers." Carnero's phone slipped from his hand. 2 officers took him by the arms as he continued to protest. But it was no use. No one in the crowd cried out for him. No one booed the police. The only voice that rose above the quiet again was Joaquin's. He turned to Mateo. "You knew?" Mateo's eyes were wet. "I found out too late. I tried to warn them. They ignored me. Said I was just sentimental. I couldn't protect Bravado then. But you did." Joaquin didn't know what to say. He looked up at the stands, at faces no longer sneering or cold. Some were wiping their eyes. Some just watched silently. For the first time in his life, Joaquin wasn't being laughed at. He was being seen. Mateo approached Bravado carefully, hand out. "It's time, old friend," he whispered. Bravado sniffed his palm, then pressed his heavy head into it. The crowd didn't cheer this time. They didn't need to. They simply stepped back, giving space, as Mateo led the bull slowly toward the exit. Bravado paused for a moment halfway through the gate, turning his massive head one last time. He looked at Joaquin, and then, with a long, deep exhale that echoed against the ring walls, he turned back and walked into the fading light of the tunnel. Joaquin stood alone in the center of the ring, bruised, bloodied, shirt torn, but taller than he had ever felt. Reporters leaned over rails. Some men with cameras whispered into microphones. Others just stared. Then, someone started to chant, "Joaquin! Joaquin!" It grew louder. The syllables rolled like waves through the crowd. His name. Not for a record-breaking ride, not for victory, but for a moment of compassion, for refusing to give in. And far from the arena, as the last rays of sun fell over the rusted rooftops of Arroyo Lento, news of what happened began to spread. Joaquin stood on the hill just as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the unfinished sanctuary grounds. The scent of sawdust, hay, and fresh paint lingered in the cool evening air. Below him, builders packed up their tools for the day, while a few volunteers rolled up tarps and secured the newly installed fencing. It had been exactly 2 months since that fateful night in the Arroyo Lento rodeo ring. 2 months since the world saw a bull spare a boy, and a boy risk everything to tell the truth. And now, the land that once belonged to Don Carnero, the man who had tried to destroy Joaquin and Bravado, was being transformed into something nobody had imagined, a place of peace, not pain. The courts had moved faster than expected. Public outcry had been relentless after the hidden footage aired. Bravado backing away from Joaquin in the ring, the tranquilizer dart embedded in his side, the panicked whispers of Carnero's men scrambling behind the scenes. Once the full investigation exposed Carnero's network of animal mistreatment and fight-fixing, his estate was seized. A quiet settlement, paid by his remaining assets and forced auctions, had helped fund the sanctuary's foundation. But Joaquin never saw it as compensation. It wasn't about money. It was about making sure no one else, man or beast, would be dragged into a ring they didn't choose. A wooden sign stood near the entrance of the ranch now, not yet painted but already drawing curious visitors. "Bravado's Sanctuary for Rescued Bulls," it read. Below it, smaller letters had been burned into the wood. "Strength isn't violence. It's restraint." Joaquin walked slowly down the slope, his boots kicking dust with each step. His body had mostly healed from the injuries sustained during his collapse and rescue, but some aches remained, especially in the mornings. His mind, however, had changed more than his body. The boy who once wanted to prove his worth in the ring had become a man with a new mission, protecting those who couldn't speak for themselves. Mateo stood by the barn, checking off supplies on a clipboard. "Fencing's almost done. The new water line too," he called as Joaquin approached. His voice was tired but steady. "How many are coming tomorrow?" Joaquin asked, taking the clipboard to glance over the inventory. 3 bulls from the Sabana Hills farm. They were going to be sold for meat, but the rancher saw the news, changed his mind, said they deserve another shot. Mateo wiped sweat from his brow. "That's happening more and more lately." Joaquin nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the far pasture, where Bravado stood alone beneath a willow tree, tail flicking lazily, his massive form silhouetted against the golden light. No rope held him there. No enclosure forced his stay. Yet every evening he returned to that same spot, as if waiting. "Has he eaten today?" Joaquin asked quietly. "Twice," Mateo replied with a small smirk, "but only when you're nearby." The words sat heavy on Joaquin's heart. Since the night in the ring, Bravado hadn't been the same. He didn't charge. He didn't run. He simply watched, observed, almost like he understood what had happened, what Joaquin had done and hadn't done. They were tied together now in a way neither fully understood, but both respected. Later that evening, Joaquin sat on the porch of the old ranch house his family nearly lost. It had taken weeks of paperwork and negotiation, but thanks to the settlement and help from the local council, the property had been secured. His younger brother, Elias, had insisted on painting the walls himself, and now the place looked brighter than it ever had. Inside, their father rested. He was not fully well, years of labor and stress had taken a toll, but he was improving, slowly, gently, and for once, he didn't wake up afraid of the mailman delivering foreclosure notices. As the stars began to dot the sky, a white van pulled up the gravel road and parked beside the barn. Out stepped a group of school children, escorted by a bus driver named Victor and a young teacher from the town school. Joaquin greeted them at the gate. "Welcome to Bravado's," he said, offering a warm handshake. "Let me show you around." The children's eyes widened as they passed the paddocks. Some bulls were grazing peacefully, while others splashed in the shallow mud pools or nudged enrichment toys Joaquin had built with leftover wood. The air was filled with low grunts, distant bellows, and the peaceful sounds of livestock simply existing, not performing. "Are they dangerous?" one boy asked, nervously eyeing a massive bull with scarred horns. "They were never the danger," Joaquin replied. "Only the ones who forced them to be." The group stopped near Bravado's pasture. The bull lifted his head as if sensing their presence, then resumed grazing. Joaquin crouched beside a young boy with curly hair who had been silent the entire tour. The boy pointed at Bravado. "Is that the one from the video? The one who didn't fight?" Joaquin nodded. "Why?" the boy whispered. "Why didn't he hurt you?" Joaquin stared at Bravado for a long moment. The wind shifted, carrying the soft rustle of grass and the creak of the old barn behind them. Finally he spoke, not just to the boy, but to himself, and to the world that still asked the same question. "Because someone else treated him like a monster," he said, his voice steady. "I treated him like a friend." The boy smiled, slowly, shyly, then turned and ran toward the fence, waving at Bravado, who raised his head and took a few steps forward, curious but calm. Joaquin watched the two faces, one old, one young, and felt a quiet, unfamiliar peace settle in his chest. As the group continued their tour, Mateo stepped beside Joaquin. "You really think this place will change things?" he asked. Joaquin nodded. "Not for everyone, but maybe for the next bull, and the next kid." The porch light flicked on behind them. Elias stepped out, holding 2 mugs of warm coffee. He handed one to Joaquin and the other to Mateo, then looked out across the land that had once been at the center of their worst fear. Now, it was something new, something earned. Bravado remained near the fence, eyes locked on Joaquin like always. Not as a threat, not as a prize, but as something far more rare, a protector, unchained. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the ranch, Joaquin realized the ring wasn't where courage was tested. It was right here, in the quiet choices, in protecting what others cast aside. And far beyond Arroyo Lento, the world finally remembered a moment when a bull refused to fight, and broke the ring instead.